Imagine that you've used all of the world's data to train your AI model and you've basically run out. And that's essentially the position that a lot of AI companies surprisingly find themselves in these days. They've ingested the whole internet, all of Wikipedia, every book ever published. They've bought their way into data from places like Reddit, and it's still not enough to keep growing their models. Or there can be problems with that data. It can be messy, it can be biased. And so what companies are increasingly doing is turning to something called synthetic data. And we've seen the power of that, or at least we suspect we have, with new models like DeepSeek. So let's take a look at what synthetic data is. And I'm an AI expert with Johns Hopkins training, so I'm here to answer these questions for you. And I'm also going to draw on this really useful article from IBM about synthetic data. So essentially, synthetic data is data that's created based on patterns in real data, and it is artificial, but it's used generally to train AI models or to supplement the training data that they're already using. So imagine that you take all of the data from human conversations and train a large language models like ChatGPT to create new conversations. Well, at a certain point in time, you're going to run out of that training data. But say there aren't a lot of conversations in there where people are talking about Siamese cats, and you need a lot more of that training data. Well, instead of going and finding a bunch of real-life conversations about Siamese cats, you could go to a model like ChatGPT, ask it to come up with 1,000 pretend conversations between two people. Maybe you specify people in different geographies, different expertise levels, other things about Siamese cats, create those conversations, and then feed them back in to train and better tweak your own model. In a nutshell, that is synthetic data. It's data that's not real. It's created by some other kind of statistical or generative model. And that's kind of a silly example, but we see this used for things like self-driving cars. Maybe a self-driving car has driven 1 million miles and has a ton of real-world data, but it hasn't encountered that many car accidents. Thankfully, car accidents just don't happen that much. So synthetic data could be used to take the car accidents that these models have seen and extrapolate and create thousands of other potential car accident scenarios that the vehicles might see so that they can learn how to navigate around those kinds of accidents, how to drive defensively to avoid the accident in the first place in real life. And so that's a place where synthetic data can be very valuable. Another nice thing about synthetic data is that it allows you to avoid disclosing health information or other sensitive data. So imagine that you wanted to train a model to better diagnose different diseases. You might not want to hand it a bunch of real patient data, but you could take the real patient data, find statistical correlations in there, symptoms, that kind of thing, and then create a bunch of fake patient case studies, for example, and use those to train the model. And that way, if anyone ever hacked in and was able to get at the training data, they wouldn't be revealing real personal information or health information, but you'd still get a lot of the benefits statistically of that training data. A similar use case for synthetic data is for avoiding bias. So imagine that you're trying to train a large language model, but you don't have a lot of data on conversations in a particular language or conversations between a particular type of person. Instead of basically having a gap in how your model is able to treat that kind of data, one solution is to create synthetic data that is in a particular language or references a particular type of person. We've seen this done a lot with visual AI. It often struggles to create images of minorities simply because there's fewer images of those kinds of people in the training data that these models look at. And so we see companies using synthetic data to create basically thousands or millions of images of people of a particular ethnic or racial minority or a geographic location and use that to supplement their existing training data so that their model is better able to work with images of a broader range of people. Now, there are problems with this approach, but the approach is also very powerful. So DeepSeek, for example, we don't know for sure, we suspect was trained essentially by using OpenAI's ChatGPT or GPT-4 models to create a ton of synthetic data, which is very clean, it's very uniform, and they were able to then feed that into DeepSeek and train it in a much easier, faster, cheaper way through a process called distillation and get something that's almost as good as the underlying model for tiny fractions of the total cost. So this approach of using synthetic data can be quite powerful. Again, we don't know for sure that's what they did, but that is the suspicion within the community as to what happened there. But as I alluded to, there are definitely problems with this approach too. And the challenge is that synthetic data is not real, and it will reflect whatever the patterns are in the training data that was used to create that synthetic data. So it risks amplifying knowledge gaps, hallucinations, and ironically, it can sometimes amplify biases as well. And we see that with DeepSeek, for example. It does tend to hallucinate more. It tends to come up with wrong information more. And that's probably because if there's a gap in the training data and you create a ton of synthetic data from that training data and then use that to train a new model, all of those gaps are just going to be amplified because you're basically teaching a model using data that is itself flawed. So that's the challenge with synthetic data. If you train a model using only synthetic information, if there's any kind of flaw, it's just going to get multiplied 100-fold or 1,000-fold and produce something that's going to have a lot of issues. So that's why we see most AI companies are using synthetic data more to plug holes in how their models are trained. Again, if you've got a really great self-driving car and you just want to train it on thousands of accident scenarios, synthetic data can be a great way to tweak and add that extra kind of edge case that you're not going to see that much in the real world while still keeping the core of your data as authentic real-world information. If you found this helpful in any way, please do subscribe to my channel, like the video, and put any questions you have down in the comments. I will be very happy to answer them for you.